Now, I'm actually very taken by Rodman and Henry's energy efficiency model, because our anatomy certainly speaks volumes of our efficient bipedal adaptation. We're clearly adapted to 100% terrestrial bipedal locomotion. I've got no problem with that. The inverted pendulum gait certainly works best in the substrates that are perfectly flat, perfectly firm and vegetation free, just like on the edge of the water on a beach. But the problem with the energy efficiency model is, how did it begin in the first place? How did the locomotion of bipedalism start to become practiced before the anatomical traits evolved to make it happen? And clearly there's lots of different ideas here, but I think the wading idea is a very good solution to this particular problem, and that's what I did some experiments to try to find out and investigate. So basically, the methods were, we just got a bunch of volunteers to walk up and down a pool, sometimes in the pool. We took their oxygen consumption in Douglas bags and calculated their energy consumption. So we basically varied the knee flexion and varied the depths and varied the speeds. And so we had all these different permutations. We didn't have all the time to do all the permutations, but a good sample of them. So our specific experimental goal was following in from Carey and Crompton's paper, like the previous speaker mentioned, because they did a similar experiment based on a treadmill, which is the usual substrates that people assume Australopithecines moved on, and basically found that the difference in cost was between 50 and 60%. So we wanted just to test to see if we could reproduce that same data on land and compare it with water, and then also vary knee flexion. So to that first question then, here we see on the left-hand side here, Carey and Crompton's findings were reproduced quite almost exactly. So this now, I should say, on the y-axis is basically everybody's energy consumption was expressed as a ratio of how much energy they took walking on dry land. So we can see one means the energy consumption of walking on dry land. The bent hip, bent knee gait was 55%. We can see that in deep water, moving at very slow speeds, the difference was pretty much negated. But even in shallower water and at more realistic speeds, the difference was greatly reduced. So, I think this confirms our original hypothesis. What about the effect of increasing knee flexion? Well, this solid line, you can see it's quite a steep curve. As knee flexion increases, the cost of locomotion obviously increases as well. I mean, try walking around with a bent hip, bent knee for a few minutes and you'll see what it's like. In water, and this is in a waist deep, 1 metre depth water, the curve is much shallower, and it's clear that the trend is that at greater knee flexions, there's no doubt it's easier to move in water than on land. What about increasing depth? Well, we didn't see much that effect here, but basically some same sorts of effects. I'll skip over this because I want to get on a bit done in that time. And in terms of speed, we saw the usual U-shaped curve where the energy efficiency is plotted against time, and no significant difference between the two gaits. So to summarise the findings, I think our study showed quite clearly that non-optimal gaits, the difference in cost between non-optimal and optimal gaits, is certainly helped by water, and the more non-optimal, the more it's helped by moving through water. And we should remind ourselves here that bonobos have been observed moving at far higher knee flexions than we would have been ethically allowed to get our volunteers to do, and I think that just adds weight to the argument. So the bottom line here is that shallow water, I think, appears to be an ideal environment for early non-optimal bipedalism to have begun. Now, I was quite proud of that study. It's a simple little set of experiments, but the results were very clear. And of course, following on from Carey and Crompton, we submitted it to JHE. And I was quite appalled that it was rejected without even going to peer review, and basically with a reminder telling us that it's not even related to human evolution. Now, when I first got back into academia to study this thing, I couldn't understand what anthropologists had a problem with this so-called aquatic ape hypothesis, and I couldn't even understand it after this. It has to be something to do with the idea that people have heard about this aquatic ape early in their careers. Probably they've been taught to sneer at it. They've put it in a box labelled crazy, along with ID and von Daniken, and that's it. They don't want to even go there. But I would ask people, how many people have actually read the original paper by Hardy in detail, as opposed to looking to sort of make fun of it, and any of the Lane-Morgan's books objectively. And I would challenge you to do so. And if you did, you'd see that really this is nothing outrageous. Basically what Hardy was proposing, that we lived on the coast and foraged through shallows for several hours at a stretch, just like many people do today in the world. Now, it seems to me quite clear that this idea has been mislabeled. It wasn't Alistair Hardy that called it the aquatic ape theory, it was Desmond Morris. And it's been misunderstood, and it's been grossly misrepresented ever since. I think it's long overdue that we relabeled it, redefined it, and started to take it a bit more seriously. So I call it waterside hypotheses in the plural, because there's more than one, of human evolution. And I say that they assert that wading, swimming and diving for food have acted as an agency of selection in our evolution more than the apes. And the main point from this reformulation of the model is to take a lesson from population genetics. We've seen many talks through this meeting where differences in altitude, latitude, drinking alcohol have had a profound effect on our phenotypes. If a population of hominids started moving through water and another population didn't move through water, isn't it exactly what you predict, that there'd be a phenotypic change quite rapidly? Anyway, I think Hardy was right about this idea, and if he was, it might be a heresy to say this, that maybe he was right about some of the other things as well. I won't go into all of these differences, but all the ape-human differences, I think, are parsimoniously explained by the same sort of thing. Now, I started with reminding us of an anniversary of Darwin's Origin of Species, and I want to end by giving you a heads up of an anniversary coming up next year, which is 50 years since Hardy came out on this idea. Now, I just have a dream that over the next 50 years, more than one paper is published in anthropological journals about this idea. Okay, I just want to finish with some acknowledgements. Nick Milne and Paul Fournier are both pretty sceptical about this, like most people are, but they've always been very supportive and never sneered at me publicly anyway. Alistair Hardy, I want to acknowledge him. This is probably the most carefully thought of idea in science. He sat on the idea for 30 years before he came out, and he certainly doesn't deserve the sneering response that he's had. But even more, I want to acknowledge a woman, Elaine Morgan, who is 90 years old next year and is still running around England giving talks and writing books. That's what I want to say. Thank you.
Do you have time for a quick question if there's one?
Using your logic, it would seem like another strongly supported hypothesis, or at least not falsified hypothesis, is that in early humans were running around the backs of dinosaurs. Because looking in the paleontological literature, you won't find articles trying to debunk that idea.
Well, that's just ridiculous. What kind of a response is that? I mean, what's so implausible about our ancestors moving through water? I mean, how can you just your response is just to make fun of an idea?
No, actually, I was going to use your logic in a number of publications in literature, and in fact, that is purely analogous, I think.
It is a little bit harsh to review the literature because people do mention it. I for one have. I think it'll be published in AAPA if the editor likes it. Just sort of angry about it.
Well, people have mentioned it, but the only two specific papers that I've found that have actually evaluated it in the context of the evolution of hominids by people is just
You have to look at my paper, committee,